kata bidayat iya namana kota bi ay sepa ay ota ay ngapi kwasi usato ko itibe hamana ota kata ayat iya na bayu
I started out my day in Arusha, Tanzania. This bustling and chaotic city is often called the capital of safari, since most safaris in northern Tanzania to parks like the Serengeti, Ngorongoro, or Tarangire start right here in this city. But there's so much more to do in this part of the country than go on safari. Northern Tanzania is rich in wildlife, but it is also rich in culture. And today I'm driving 3 hours to the very remote Lake Eyasi area to meet the Hadzabe tribe. If you're new to this channel, hi, my name is Laura, and I've spent the past few years traveling all over the world, but especially to African countries. Over here, I typically share lots of travel vlogs, hidden gems, and some travel guides, so if that sounds like something you like, make sure you give me a follow, make sure you subscribe. And now let's go back into the video. So the Hadzabe are unlike any other tribe or culture in the world because they are the last hunter-gatherers in East Africa. So hunter-gatherers, as the name suggests, still hunt and gather all of their food. They do not practice farming, they do not have any livestock. All of their food comes directly from their environment around them, and they have a very similar lifestyle to the one that all human beings had around 10,000 years ago. So a very, very long time ago, tens of thousands of years ago, all humans lived in a very similar way, where they lived in small communities of 20 to 30 people, and they gathered berries and fruits and vegetables from plants around them, and they hunted wild animals, and they fished in rivers and lakes to get protein and other kinds of nutrients. And the main sources for their food were in the environment, they were out in nature. But around 10,000 years ago, humans started to develop farming in the Middle East, and the area which is now Iraq and Turkey, along the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. And it ended up expanding all over the world, all over Asia, Europe, the Americas, and Africa, to create the societies that we know today, which depend mostly on farming and livestock to get their food and nutrients. However, there were a few hunter-gatherer communities left in the world, in places such as the deserts of Australia or the frozen tundra of the Arctic, also in the remote islands of the Philippines or the jungles of Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Amazon, and also in Africa. Something else happened in Africa which was crucial for the expansion of farming, and that was the Bantu expansion. So up until about 4,000 years ago, most of Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa was populated by hunter-gatherer communities like the Hadzabe, also known as foragers. But in two waves, one in 4,000 before Christ and another one in 2,000 before Christ, people from the highlands of what is now Nigeria and Cameroon migrated and expanded all throughout Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa, all throughout that part of the continent, bringing farming with them and either integrating or displacing hunter-gatherer communities. The legacy of the Bantu expansion meant that nowadays most sub-Saharan African communities depend on farming and livestock to get their food. Most of the population depends on these two things to get their nutrients. But the expansion also impacted African populations and African cultures in other ways. For example, most of the languages spoken nowadays in Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa are of Bantu origin. And only a handful of hunter-gatherer communities survived with their language, their culture, their traditions, and their hunting and gathering intact. Most of these communities survived in places that were extremely remote. So, for example, the Khoisan survived in the Kalahari Desert of Namibia, and there's a lot of hunter-gatherer communities who survived in Namibia and South Africa specifically, but also in the jungles of the Congo and the tropical forests of Central Africa, since these places were harder to reach by the Bantu communities, so that meant that hunter-gatherer communities there were harder to displace. But that was not really the case in East Africa, and the Hadzabe are the only hunter-gatherer community that survived in the whole of East Africa. There are only 3,000 Hadzabe left in the whole world, and they all live in the area around Lake Eyasi in northern Tanzania. So that is where I was headed. It took me 3 hours to drive there from Arusha, and while this place is remote, it is not nearly as remote as some of the others that I mentioned here, which makes it very impressive that the Hadzabe survived the Bantu expansion and all of the other cultural movements and movements of people that have happened in Africa and in this region since then. When I finally got to the place where the Hadzabe were staying, after roughly 2 hours of driving on a paved road, then deviating in the town of Karatu onto an unpaved road where we drove there for around an hour and then we walked for a bit. After all of that, when I finally got to meet the Hadzabe, I greeted everyone. I was very grateful to be able to do this tour with them. And I immediately started listening to their language, which is incredibly unique. The language spoken by the Hadzabe people is called Hadzanee, and it has some similarities with other hunter-gatherer languages spoken in East Africa, specifically two languages spoken by forager communities in Namibia and South Africa, which all use clicks as consonants, which is very rare. It is not common to find a language that has this characteristic. However, the Hadzabe language, Hadzanee, is different enough from all other languages in the world that it forms its own unique language family. So even though it has some similarities with, again, forager languages spoken in South Africa and Namibia, it is still very distinct from those languages. But the best way to see just how unique this language is to listen for yourself. Okay.
Yeah, he says that no problem when you are here, just feel at home. Everything is okay. Be free, you can just take a picture as much as you can.
Okay.
The name is called Dudukwe.
Dudu?
Dudukwe.
Dudukwe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dudukwe.
Okay.
Hakata bitayat iya namana kwata ipi I sepa I ota ngapi ikwasi usotoko itipe. Hamana ota kakata ayat iya na ota kakata he ota aduko. Koitago sango bamana bayat ufufu. Hamana. Akanabe.
Hadzanee.
Adani yako.
Adani yako. Tombo. Kalima. Akasume.
Singa u.
The kurus. The big animals, okay.
The gazelles, the kurus.
Hama adaya ko bale hamana kwa ota usepa anena ota dukun enena ota kakata kwa songa hamana aya kwene akatinga uaya kwa kwa gokoso iso kata so usepa ahe ama kazanga oe aya kwa pema na mpaka kwa komporo duli amana so ikaso tete aya iso kwa kapicha alembe kwa duso shaka so kobale cheche iyo waka ya chiki naso kobale tamanambe tete lilina ayak adani ko no o ko boko
there's poison in this one. Oh, okay.
Manabiti na manako ko manabiti na ko kakata kwa konkolo ko duli iso so tete so.
Yeah. And where do they get the poison from this? Like, what is it?
They get from the plant.
From plants. Okay. From that one? Okay. Monkeys, yeah. He's saying that you have to be smart to hunt these. Yeah, okay. Okay.
Na eko aya ukwabichi yako isa ono. Iyako isa makasama aya owa koko kaya.
Okay, those they can pull out,
Yes,
and these they don't.
Yes. Okay.
So they use this
Okay.
for the animal that they can touch.
Yeah,
Ako
so
aya
for
chita-
monkeys,
Yes, for
baboons.
monkeys. So when
Okay.
they take it
Ako
out,
aya
they feel
chita
also the
ota tato gabiti na ko
Yeah.
ota kata ba atlako ota arkana
Yeah.
asha asha ota chita kilikin tibe tato gabiti na ay.
Okay.
In that last video, the person who is speaking is talking about different kinds of arrows that the Hadzabe use for hunting. So the Hadzabe only use bows and arrows to hunt. They don't use spears, they don't use knives or anything of the sort. Only bows and arrows, which they make themselves from wood and the tendons of animals to make the strings. And they also make their own arrows, which they use different kinds of arrows for different animals that they hunt. So they have arrows for bigger animals and for smaller animals. They also have arrows that are specific to hunt small birds. And this arrow that I'm showing you right here is specifically to hunt monkeys and baboons. So baboons are smart animals, and if they get shot with an arrow, they know how to pull it out, how to take it out from their body. So to prevent them from doing that, these arrows have dents in the point of the arrow so that the arrow will stay inside the monkey and they can hunt it successfully. Something that my guide told me, which I thought was very interesting, is that when a man wants to propose in the Hadzabe community, he can marry whoever he wants. If two people like each other, they can marry, and there's no mingling from other family members or from other people in the group. But the man does have to bring 2 large baboons so they can feast, and that is the marriage ritual, the marriage ceremony. The Hadzabe also never hunt hyenas. It is forbidden in their culture, and the reason for this is that when a Hadzabe person dies, they are not buried, they are not cremated. They are left out in the bush to go back to nature, and they are eaten by hyenas often. Hyenas eat cadavers. So the Hadzabe consider that eating a hyena is like eating their brothers and sisters. It's equivalent to cannibalism in their culture. Most of what the Hadzabe eat day to day consists of small animals, small birds, and also wild fruits and berries that the women gather. The women are in charge of gathering and the men are in charge of hunting. Occasionally, they also go fishing in Lake Eyasi. And larger animals such as antelope are harder to find and they're not hunted as regularly. Since we're on the topic, I want to talk a little bit about a myth that I learned about hunter-gatherers and humanity in general, which I learned was not true during my time with the Hadzabe, but you know how people often say that back when all humans were hunter-gatherers, we operated on a scarcity mindset, that we never had enough. We were always looking for food, searching for nutrients, because we never knew if we were going to have them the next day. And that is the reason why a lot of people think that humans today, humans in capitalist societies, tend to hoard stuff and accumulate things because of that scarcity mindset, because our quote-unquote monkey brains tell us to. Well, I realized that that is completely false. According to that logic, you would expect the Hadzabe to hunt as much as they can. If they see 5 antelopes in one day, to hunt them all and to gather as many plants and tubers and berries as they can. But they actually don't do that. They hunt only what they need, they gather only what they need, and they consume it in the day. They don't worry excessively about not being able to find food because they live in an environment of abundance. With the exception of natural catastrophes such as droughts or other similar events happening, they know that they're always going to have enough food to sustain their small groups of 20 or 30 people. And even if they were to hunt more than they could eat in a day, they have no way of preserving food, so it makes absolutely no sense for them to accumulate food or to hoard things. After my visit to the Hadzabe, I read a couple of books which go a lot deeper into this topic, and they talk about lots of other things as well, but they do talk a lot about hunter-gatherer lifestyles and hunter-gatherer societies. They are called Work, A History of How We Spend Our Time by James Suzman and Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, which is a bestseller. It is a fantastic book. I will make sure I link my Amazon storefront in the description where you can find all of those books and more in case you're interested in reading them. But it was from these books that I learned that this scarcity mindset doesn't actually come from hunter-gatherers. It comes from farming societies because when humans started farming, and even farming societies today, you never know when you're going to have a bad crop versus a good crop. So when you have a good crop, you hoard things, and farming societies actually have methods of keeping food fresh and keeping food in a good state to consume. And honestly, this completely changed the way that I view the world and the way that I view my life, because I'd always thought that our need to hoard things, to consume, capitalism basically, was something that is inherently human, something that was biologically ours, that was in our DNA, and that had always been there since humanity started, since the time of the hunter-gatherers. But it turns out it's not. It's a symptom of the society that we live in and the society that humans have lived in for the past 10,000 years since farming started. And this is why I love to travel and why I love visiting other cultures, because there is always so much you can learn if you keep an open mind and you try to understand other people. What you can learn is truly fascinating, and how much it can change your life and your perspective of the world is just amazing to me. But anyways, let's go back to my visit. So after showing me the different kinds of arrows that the Hadzabe use and the different kinds of hunting techniques, the Hadzabe showed me a little bit more about their lifestyle and specifically their housing situation. So the Hadzabe live in huts that they build themselves. The way they are built is that they take some large branches and they put them into the soil, and then they weave in between them, think kind of like a basket. They kind of do an upside down basket, which is like really large, and they sleep in it. And then they cover it with some leaves and other plants that they can find. They have a separate area for cooking, and the men and women live in different places during the day. They all go back together at night, but during the day they're in separate areas. So in the particular settlement that I was in, the women stayed around the huts that they built, which, by the way, the huts are built by the women, not by the men. And the men stayed in a cave which was maybe 50 meters away from the huts. During the dry season, they move to another settlement every 6 to 8 weeks to keep up with game and with hunting. And during the rainy season, they all move into cave systems in the highlands because the huts that they build are not waterproof, so they can't stay in them during the rainy season. And I'm well aware, as I'm recording this, that the fact that the Hadzabe live in caves, at least for part of the year, and the way that they speak and their customs and traditions, is going to tempt some people to call them cavemen or similarly rude and degrading names. It is a very common stereotype for hunter-gatherer communities around the world, as well as many tribes and cultures in Africa, for them to be considered prehistoric or less human, less intelligent somehow. And let me just get one thing out of the way. The Hadzabe are just as human as everyone else. They have the same intellectual capacity as any other human on this planet, and there's actually an argument to be made that they're some of the most intelligent humans in the world. Think about it. These are people who can survive in their environment by themselves. If one Hadzabe got stranded in the middle of the savannah, they would know how to hunt, they would know how to gather, they would know how to fish, they would know how to build shelter and make fire, cook, survive, and find water. Could you do all those things? Because I know I certainly wouldn't be able to. Our society has a high degree of specialization, where we have doctors and lawyers and pharmacists and engineers and people who can do very specific tasks that on a large scale benefit all of society and can create really accommodated and convenient lifestyles for all of us. But individually, none of us would be able to survive in our societies and our environment. And we also wouldn't be able to survive in a natural environment like that of the Hadzabe. Collectively, our society holds so much knowledge. We hold much more knowledge than at any other point in our history. And yes, collectively, our society holds more knowledge than the Hadzabe. But individually, on an individual level, every single Hadzabe person holds so much knowledge than any one of us. They know how to survive. They have all the skills and knowledge, and we do not. This was made very clear to me when the Hadzabe showed me how they make fire.
Aya. Hadzabe tabadukun bachua chua tumbateko bachua ayasan.
Okay.
Ay bitabang. Yasa na to meka zanasi yasa.
Yeah.
So they do like this
Yes.
anytime if they want to
Okay.
smoke. They get
Yes.
that,
Okay, that was fast.
Beno.
Like a matchbox.
Yeah.
Yeah. But sure.
I tried making fire myself, and I can assure you this takes skill. It takes strength and it takes a lot of skill. It was actually very, very difficult. Like, I know for sure that I wouldn't be able to survive in this environment, but the Hadzabe, they can do that. Anyways, I've talked a lot about the Hadzabe from a hunter-gatherer perspective, but they're also so much more than that. The Hadzabe are much more than just the way that they get their food. They also have their customs and traditions and their myths and beliefs. So I want to show you a little bit of the music that they played for me with one of the instruments that they have. And they also showed us a traditional dance that they do. This is a celebration dance, and I thought it was very cool, so I wanted to show you. Thank you. I think it's also important to mention that even though the Hadzabe live in a very remote place and their culture is very, very unique, they don't live in complete isolation. The land that they live on around Lake Eyasi is a land that the Tanzanian government has given them for their use, and they share a border with the Dadoga tribe. So the Dadoga are a completely different culture to the Hadzabe. For starters, they are not hunter-gatherers, they have livestock, they are a herding community, and they have a completely different language. There have been some disputes along the border that they share with the Hadzabe because the Dadoga need a lot of grazing ground for their cattle, and they have encroached on Hadzabe territory, which obviously puts pressure on the Hadzabe and their hunting lifestyle, but none of these disputes have been violent. And in spite of occasional disagreements, the Hadzabe do trade with the Dadoga. So one of the things they trade, for example, are the arrowheads for their arrows. So historically, the Hadzabe have created all of their bows and arrows themselves, but they do not know how to use metal. They do not work metal at all, but the Dadoga do. So they trade with them. Usually they exchange meat that they hunt for arrows and beads and clothing as well. You might have noticed that the clothing is industrial in occasion, some of the clothing that the Hadzabe wear. And of course, the Hadzabe also interact with tourists such as myself, and they have been the subject of many anthropological studies and documentaries, so filmmakers, anthropologists of various kinds. So even though they definitely live in a very isolated place, there's no such thing as complete isolation for the Hadzabe. There's also usually 1 or 2 people they send to school to learn Swahili, to learn English, and these are the people who later become tour guides and who later mediate discussions with the Datoga, for example, or with anthropologists. Anyways, this is the end of my time with the Hadzabe. After this, I went back to Arusha, and if you want to visit the Hadzabe yourself while you're in Northern Tanzania, which I highly recommend that you do, by the way, if you want to do that, I will link the exact tour that I did in the description. So I did a day trip from Arusha, and I will also link an overnight tour to see the Hadzabe, which I honestly wish that I had done that instead, because you get to spend so much more time with the Hadzabe, you get to go on a hunt with them, which would have been so cool, and you also get to see the Datoga tribe. So I'm gonna be honest, I didn't do this tour because it was out of my budget. These are not cheap tours by any means, but they are worth every single penny, and I have so many regrets that I didn't choose the overnight tour over the day tour. So I will leave both of those links in the description so you can choose whatever tour you prefer. And just as a little disclaimer, those are affiliate links, meaning that I get a commission if you book through them at no extra cost to you. So the price for you is exactly the same as for anyone else. It's just that I get a small percentage of that. So I would really appreciate it if you use those links if you do want to go see the Hadzabe. Anyway, so this is the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed, and if you did, make sure you leave a like, you leave a comment, you subscribe. All of those things help me out so much more than you can imagine, and I hope to see you in my next video.